Hey everyone, let's look at some mineralisation. We've spoken a lot about the rocks, but let's see what the current known mineral occurrences look like and potentially what any potential discoveries could look like as well. So just a quick outline, we're going to explore current knowledge about the mineral systems that we have within the Stavely Arc at a variety of scales. We're going to focus exclusively pretty much on the Cambrian occurrences, although it has been touched on previously, there is mineralisation associated with younger events. We're going to examine the potential large-scale controls on mineralisation in the Stavely Arc rocks, and that's based on all the information that's been presented this morning, the new geodynamic setting and the new insights that we've been given by geochemistry and geochronology. We undertook a mineral occurrence data mining exercise, mainly from the point of view to essentially be a bit more predictive about what style mineralisation may occur and where, and all that leads into essentially we've developed a better appreciation of the current styles of mineralisation that are expressed throughout the Stavely Arc rocks, and that allows us to assess undercover mineral potential. I just wanted to touch briefly on the mineral systems approach. So essentially we've got a tectonic trigger. We'll go into that in a bit more detail, but it's already been alluded to. That leads to fertility in source regions. We have nice architecture, structural architecture, which gets fluids that carry in ligands and metals into a deposit, which is focused in a physiochemical or structural trap. And then we also have things that occur at the time of mineralisation. We get dispersion around the deposit from outflow, but also we get much later geochemical dispersion as a result of things like later weathering events. And also we pickle the deposit as well, so we preserve it in some way. We look at the large-scale tectonic triggers. We're all comfortable now with a westward dipping subduction zone underneath the proto-Australian continental margin that was Gondwana land. And essentially we had the subduction, and we also had later trench retreat, and that generated back arc extension as well. We got enrichment of the fluids and metals potentially in the mantle wedge above that subducting slab. And the great thing that we've got for mineralisation is we had prolonged compression during that Delamerian orogeny. We haven't really gone into the structural nomenclature that we've been used. Ross will do that after lunch. But essentially that prolonged compression generates magma stalling, which generates a lot of replenishment, generates a lot of fractional crystallisation, and a lot of time for goodies to be stored in magma chambers. Then what happens if we have a swap to transtension during D1B, and that's generated by the arrival of that Van die Land microcontinent to the southeast, and that's the key because that trigger generates extensive melting and intrusion of porphyry rocks. If we're thinking about large-scale fertility, we want some indication that we've got some large-scale fluid plumbing happening, and magnetotelluric work that's been published for Western Victoria demonstrates we have heterogeneous structure underneath Western Victoria, and these high conductivity zones or chargeability zones are likely remnants of some fossilised hydrothermal fluid pathway that originated at some depth as well. So that's pretty useful in terms of thinking about the larger scale system and fluids carrying metals from depth from a subducting slab and the SCLM, metasomatizing the SCLM. If we look at the lead isotope signature, they're a key indicator of obviously the metallogenic flavour that we get in the Stavely Arc. There's been some mention already of how the Stavely Arc correlates with the Mount Reeds. The lead isotope data demonstrates the moistened fault which separates the Grampians-Stavely Zone and the Stavely Arc rocks to the west from the Stawell Zone to the east. That demonstrates that moistened fault is a major terrain banding suture, and we get a distinct lead isotope signature difference across those. We get very primitive leads in the Stawell Zone, and we get a mixture of primitive and continental lead in the Stavely Arc. And we also see that the Stavely Arc leads are very different to the Mount Reeds as well. So that's implying that they're in a different setting, despite them being a similar age and a long strike. just looking at large-scale prospectivity, so this is based on the work of Laux. We looked at proxies for hornblende crystallisation in magmas, and you want hornblende crystallisation because obviously that means you've got a wet magma, and wet magmas that have a lot of liquid that allow you to transport metals into ore deposits. So if we just look at how that compares with known porphyry systems worldwide, we see that quite a lot of the belts do in the prospective zone for strontium, yttrium, and vanadium, scandium as well. And those belts are Dimboola Belt, Grampian, Dryden, Stavely, and also, most importantly, the Bushy Creek complex. And that gets back to the notion now that we're happy with porphyry-style mineralisation occurring outside the belts and in the interbelt sedimentary rocks between the belts. We can do a similar thing for VHMS prospectivity, and it's based on the work of Steve Piercy. So essentially, this is just looking at particular magmatic associations which are characteristic of high temperature magmatism. So that would indicate rifting, which is obviously a good environment for VHMS systems. We look at the felsic rocks in terms of these ratios. Some of them seem to plot in the known mineralised belts worldwide, but some of them plot outside, and those belts are the Black Range, Stavely, Dimboola and Dryden belts. And for mafic rocks, these ratios demonstrate that maybe we've got two associations here. One style of mineralisation associated with those bonanites, so we could have potential for early VMS style mineralisation in the 4 arc, but also we see an association with morb type chemistries, so that would be in the back arc. So the Bunawa and Dryden and morb, and the Black Range, Stavely, Dimboola and Dryden are all in the bonanitic low titanium andesite field. Whilst we're here as well, we might as well do a similar thing that's been compiled for intrusion-related gold systems, even though these are largely Devonian, predicted to be largely Devonian in the Stavely region, and notwithstanding the issues with elemental mobility for potassium and rubidium. We see here that the rocks of the Victoria Valley batholiths, so all these ones here, and the Rocklands rhyolite as well, plot in a similar field to intrusion-related goals in Eastern Australia. If you want more details on conceptual mineral systems potential, I direct you to the regional synthesis. That covers Devonian systems, but also potential for SEDEX sedimentary hosted base metal deposits, which may now occur in the Glen Thompson sandstone, and as we know, that's now a correlate to the CAM2 group, which hosts mineralisation of that style in South Australia. If we look at large-scale architecture, so this is important for the emplacement of magmas, the hydrothermal plumbing to actually transport your fluid, and then also trapping the mineralisation at hopefully a deposit. We can use a variety of predictors, and this is based on work that Ross is going to present after lunch again. VHMS systems, so it would be really important to send volcanic faults, so the pre-D1B faults, which would be largely associated with west-northwest, east-south-east shortening during D1A, and we can predict a variety of faults that would be associated with that. So we'd be happy to look for those sorts of indicators if we were looking for a VMS system. For porphyry and epithermal, if we're focusing on that late-stage transtension event, so that's D1B, we'd be looking for faults in this orientation to control those systems. Touching on the mineral occurrence data mining exercise we did for Stavely, we looked at open file mineral exploration reports that were available and housed by the GSV. We restricted the use to actual physical mineralisation rather than including geophysical and geochemical targets which may or may not have been tested, and that's just because it would have been hard to track those through time. A description for all the major ones are provided in the GSV regional synthesis report, and the data is actually attached to the GSV historical mineral exploration report. And at the end of today, we'll give you a few pointers. If you want to find out more, there'll be some hyperlinks that will be available to link straight to those reports. And the theory behind this was to interpret the style of mineralisation so we could be more predictive about where we'd start looking for mineral deposits. So this exercise increased the overall data set by 25%. But obviously, because there's not a lot of outcrop, especially Cambrian outcrop, only 15% of those mineral occurrences are actually Cambrian in age, and they've been classified as these: Ordovician, Silurian, orogenic gold. And that's included here because the Stavely project area went just into the margin of the store zone. So those are located in the store zone. We have a lot of intrusion-related gold mineral occurrences, and we've got the world-class mineral sands deposits sitting in the Murray Basin cover. There are a few major points that come out of this exercise that essentially they've been touched on previously, that all the mineral occurrences are essentially located in Cambrian rocks, are associated in the Black Range and the Stavely belt here. And that is significant because it only comprises a really small amount of the total project area. We're going to predict that VMS systems are restricted to the volcanic belts themselves or close to them. And we're going to see that epithermal and porphyry occurrences occur both in the volcanic belt segments and interbelt sedimentary rocks. And because we can identify structural and geochemical extensions to those belts under cover, there's obviously a lot of prospectivity to be had when you go beyond the limits of the Cambrian exposure. So we need to rethink the prospectivity. The porphyry systems, we've got 7 prospects that are characterised by porphyry-style mineralisation. The majority are hosted in the volcanic belt segments, but some are importantly outside them. The best constraints we've got on timing from Chrissy's work are approximately 502 for 500 to 500. There's 4 that we know most about. They all show evidence for supergene enrichment, so they've all got chalcositic blankets. And Thursday's GOSSAN is the one that's had the most work done, and that's the one that we'll discuss most today. And that's got an inferred resource of 28 billion tonnes at 0.4 copper at a 0.2% cut-off grade. But there's numerous other prospects that are characterised by anomalous geochemistry in terms of porphyry pathfinder elements, but there's little geological information to actually characterise them. So Thursday's GOSSAN sitting in here, close in the Stavely belt, close to the junction with the narrow Pumalap belt. And it's hosted in the Tonaway Tuff, Fairview, Andesitic breccia, Glen Thompson sandstone, and in a series of stocks and dikes, which are locally termed the Victor porphyries. We've got the supergene blanket extends from 4 kilometres north-south, and it's pretty flat-lying and is developed over hypogene mineralisation as well. It's a chalcocite bornite covellite assemblage, and it's currently under exploration by Stavely Minerals, and they've been recently having very, very encouraging results. Here's one of the early drill holes. That's an intersection, pretty good intersection for the supergene mineralisation, and this one here is one of the first holes that actually intersected hypogene mineralisation. So more recently, oh, sorry, apologies for that, they've cut off. We've been getting, the Stavely Minerals have been getting very encouraging results in this northwestern portion, and we'll see some of the rocks of that in a minute. But first I'd like to touch on the hydrothermal alteration assemblages that we see, and they're subparallel, they're arranged in subparallel arrangement to the overall structural grain of the Stavely belt. The largest is an expression, a 6 kilometre long expression of propylitic assemblage, so that's chlorite, epidote, calcite, zeolite, cerussite, albite, magnetite, hematite and biotite. And zooming in, we've got an outline of quartz, cerussite, pyrite, phylic alteration, a bit of advanced argillic, kaolinite, dickite and quartz associated with vein stockworking of quartz. And we also have late silica flooding, which is largely unrelated to mineralisation. If we look at some of the hypogene mineralisation, so this is some of the early drilling, we see a lot of positive indicators for porphyry mineralisation. So cerussite altered porphyry with sheeted A veins overcut by quartz pyrite B veins. We see chalcopyrite and quartz pyrite veins as well with chlorite sericite envelopes to them, and we also see quartz chalcopyrite pyrite bornite D veins with sericitic alteration. More recent drilling has identified chalcopyrite magnetite hematite, a mineralisation and large intersections of magnetite veining, which are again positive indicators of a porphyry system. And we see bornite, chalcocite, pyrite D veins again, which are an important host for high-grade, relatively high-grade mineralisation in the recent drilling that Stavely Minerals have undertaken. In terms of alteration, we're also seeing more positive indicators of potassic alteration, so biotite alteration, biotite-actinolite altered porphyries, K-feldspar veining. But we also see textures that are indicative of a highly fluidised environment. So we see things that could be interpreted as UST textures. We also see fluidised micro-breccias, and we see multiple phases of intrusion, so all positive indicators. Moving on to the epithermal occurrences, there's three main prospects that have been characterised by epithermal style mineralisation: Fairview North, Fairview South, Glen Lyle, and they occur both within and outside the volcanic belts. We do have limited constraints on timing, and Chris, you're going to hate me for this because I just took a mean weighted age of your two zircon analyses for for those Stavely 17 dikes. So we reckon that's the best constraint currently that we've got for epithermal style mineralisation at Fairview South. They're associated with phyllic and advanced argillic hydrothermal alteration assemblages and porphyry dikes, and they're enriched in typical elements you'd find associated with epithermal systems. Adullar areas previously been reported at Stavely North. We haven't found any, but we did find a lot of kaolinite present, so it's currently undetermined whether these are low sulphidation or high sulphidation. So we've just gone a little bit south here from Thursday's GOSSAN, and we see the Fairview North, Fairview South, and that's where the Stavely 17 strat drill hole was drilled as well. The Stavely North and Stavely South are part of a 4.8 kilometre long gold in soil B horizon geochemical anomaly. It's hosted in the Glen Thompson Sandstone and a series of porphyritic dikes that intrude the sequence. And here's some typical intersections that have been reported. We see gold mineralisation as inclusions in pyrite and quartz, loosely associated with sphalerite and galena. And the pyrite's disseminated and the veins are in veinlets, and that's also cut by quartz chert veins. And the lack of actual large-scale development of epithermal textures may just be a function of the host rock, so people should keep that in mind when they're looking at this stuff. It might just look pretty disseminated and not concentrated in large-scale veining. We'll see later in a talk about potential exploration vectors that the phyllic hydrothermal alteration assemblage in this hole extends 30 metres beyond the actual mineralisation, and that an advanced argillic, so quartz sericite, pyrite kaolinite, an advanced argillic alteration assemblage is associated with this mineralised interval in Stavely 17. Navarra have recently reported exploration results from the Dryden Belt. So we've swapped eastwards into the Dryden Belt, where they undertook air core drilling through 50 metres of neurovolcanic cover to bedrock refusal. And what this was targeting was this circular-like structure here, which intrudes and partially truncates the volcanics of the Dryden Belt. And what they reported were broad zones of silver mineralisation associated with discrete smaller intervals of quartz gold mineralisation. 12% of the drill holes finished in mineralisation, with also enrichment in lead and zinc. And the alteration assemblage there was reported as quartz sericite pyrite that was hosted by andesitic volcanics. Moving on to VHMS occurrences. We've already discussed that they could be related to fore-arc initiation or back-arc during initiation of subduction, or back-arc initiation or full extension back-arc spreading. Typically, the occurrences that we see at Stavely are associated with stringer-hosted pyrite, chalcopyrite, sphalerite, galena mineralisation associated with quartz, sericite, chlorite, hydrothermal alteration and carbonate veining. We also see, in a lot of cases, massive sulphide replacement of haloclastitic volcaniclastic breccias. The occurrences that we see at the moment are in the Dryden Belt. This is Wycliffe here that was briefly mentioned. A question from the audience, and we see a concentration of VHMS systems up here in the Black Range, Brimpane and the Dimboola Belt. What we see as well here is that those are the morb-associated rocks that Anthony was talking about, and this means that the Bunarwa Belt could be prospective for back-arc style VHMS mineralisation. Getting back to the question about Wycliffe, I'm not actually going to talk about Wycliffe, but what Wycliffe represents is it could be a hybrid system. The sulphur isotope data for Wycliffe are strongly positive, so it's not just a simple porphyry-related system. There's some involvement of seawater there, and the style of mineralisation doesn't really look like a porphyry. But again, that could just be host rock control. Yeah, it's up for debate. We're going to concentrate instead on the Black Range, so we've jumped northwest of the Grampians ranges, where there's a large concentration of VHMS mineral occurrences in the Black Range belt. The most well-known occurrence is the Eclipse Prospect, which is currently being explored by Navarre, and that's hosted in de-vitrified, dacitic to rhyolitic, volcanic and volcaniclastic rocks. It's got a near-surface chalcositic blanket, which is partially hidden under Grampians group cover. The mineralisation is characterised by massive sulphide laminated veins and cut by quartz calcite pyrite veins. And we've got a transition of the hydrothermal assemblage between sericite and chlorite-rich phyllic alteration assemblages. In this area as well, there seems to be a north-northwest trend, so again, parallel to the margins of the belt, where there's a series of other deposits with similar characteristics, such as the Coringa Woolshed, so good they named it twice, that's hosted in Black Shale, the Mine Paddock prospect, which is hosted in Basalt, and Hogan's prospect, which is lead, zinc, barium exhalative lenses in volcaniclastic rocks. Recently, AusPac Resources reported government-funded, co-funded government drilling from the Dimboola Belt, and that was following up on previous mud rotary drilling that again drilled to bedrock refusal. And what they found is that at depth, 250 metres depth, they intersected basement, and then below that they were starting to see these volcaniclastic breccias which are cerutised, chloratised, and strongly replaced. The matrix to that breccia is strongly replaced by sulphide. So that's pretty far removed from any of these occurrences that we've been talking about. So that's been a pretty whistle-stop tour about the mineral occurrences at Stavely. There's a lot more information contained within the regional synthesis, but the key takeaways are that the known mineral occurrences are restricted to, at the moment, are currently restricted to Cambrian exposure, but obviously recent exploration results have been changing that. They show a lot of features that are consistent with arc-related mineral systems, so porphyry, epithermal and VHMS. The porphyry and epithermal systems can occur inside and outside the belts, and the VHMS occurrences are thought to largely occur within or closely to the margins of the belts. We've got a presence of several large-scale key indicators which say that the system was actually fertile, and we've got likely preservation, and DT will speak about this later, that it's been buried by the Grampians group and has undergone relatively little uplift since the Devonian, so there's a high preservation potential. And yeah, just in conclusion, that the positive geochemical fertility indicators indicate that a lot of the belts that don't have known mineral occurrences in them are fertile. That's it.